All right, how's it going, David?
Hey, good morning, Lee. I'm in the middle of my living room with a bunch of kids around, so as usual. I'm sick. One of them's not going to go to school at least today, so.
Ooh, hopefully nothing too severe.
No, nothing too bad. In the COVID times, though, you got to stay home from school for all sorts of reasons that I was like, God, my daughter's just home much more than my son ever was. And I think that's not actually, I think they basically were the same amount of sick as babies and toddlers. You're still hungry, you want more food? Okay, I'll find you something more. Let's have some fruit next. All right, I'm gonna go prepare fruit while people are joining.
No worries.
Hi.
Hey, hey.
All right, folks. Second TOC meeting. Who wants to start it off?
So I put a couple of items on the agenda for today, which people have generally seemed to thumbs up, so that's kind of cool. So the first one was talking more about the chair situation. Then the second one was contacting working group participants in advance of next week to try and make sure that people are well aware of what's going on. And the third one was the keynote talk progress. Anything else to add on to that?
I would add that we want to consider the CF deployment related working group definition process, where we were thinking about piloting a single working group with like one or two properties that we were pretty sure belong together. So that'll be fine. I think we could do that 4.
Okay, I will put in 4 for that. Cool. Okay, so on the chair side, I have heard back from our proprietary and ethics committee, and they say I can, if that is what we would like to do.
You're not gonna cross any legal boundaries or any issues like that?
They're all good with that one.
Outstanding. Okay, well, I think we can make this very straightforward because I think there was general agreement in the group that Lee would be great, not just because Lee's a great person, but also because I think it would be wonderful to have someone who's not from VMware, and in this case, actually not from SAP either. And I think that would be really cool. So let's just confirm everybody's okay with this. So Eric, are you a yay or nay?
Sounds good to me.
All right, David?
Yay.
All right, Jan?
That's good.
Stefan?
Yep, thumbs up.
And Lee, now's your chance to say no.
Yep.
Thumbs up.
That's cool.
All right,
with me.
Congratulations, Lee. You now have more. You now have a bunch of responsibility and no additional compensation.
Yeah.
Or really power.
Yep.
Yeah, that too.
That's cool with me.
All right.
You do get to brief the board, though. That'll be fun.
Mm.
Yeah. Super duper exciting. So yeah, I'll follow up with you, Lee, on that part of the role. But then I will now go back on mute.
Cool. So moving on to the second point then, contacting a working group in advance of next week. So Chip rather wonderfully has shared a spreadsheet with some contact information in there. So if we all have a look through there, and if there's anybody that knows, obviously this is way out of date and there is no point contacting this individual, please feel free to flag it in there. But I'm quite happy to put together a quick email to let these individuals know that there's the session next week to discuss moving from the project groups to the working groups, and would they like to pop along and give their thoughts. So that seemed like a sensible.
There's just one remark from my side. If I see it correctly, this spreadsheet only has the project leads, not the anchors. So we should probably tell them to spread the invitation.
Yep. Okay, cool. That is no problem at all.
Is that the spreadsheet that's also linked from the PMC notes repo README?
Probably.
Okay, I'm gonna double check. Because yeah, I think there are some areas where that's out of date.
And I think I've seen an outdated spot, although like probably I shouldn't say anything. Let's just invite Dr. Jules, but I don't think that he's still leading garden or thing. We might still want to invite him, and he might even come. So maybe anyway.
Yeah, there are much more projects that are completely out of maintenance, I would even say. But it doesn't matter, right? For me, the bigger question is how do we start? Do we start on a blank sheet, or do we start with a proposal? For instance, the one that is in the PR by Jan that may then need a little bit more work, I think, upfront, because there are many projects missing. And that's a question. Or we can also start from a blank sheet, but usually this doesn't work out in my experience.
Yeah, I'd agree with that one. Starting with a blank sheet's always the tricky bit. Okay, cool. So where are we in the week? So if we can have a look at that over the next day or so, and then I can get something out UK close of play Wednesday. How does that sound? As an email just to prod people about next week's session.
I think that'd be good. Coincidentally, I've been still keeping well, I guess actually we still do have it even on the community calendar, the Runtime PMC bi-weekly meeting. So as the I guess still the lead for the Runtime PMC, although that's detached from any kind of authority at this point, I did send a reminder email out to the project leads about that, and I mentioned just fairly casually that we wanted to dedicate the next TOC meeting on July 13th to this discussion. But I think it'd be good to have several reminders. People are going to see that and forget. So if we have an official communique from the TOC, then I think that would help reinforce that. And also if we know who those tech leads are for the projects, then we can add them as well and get their input.
Okay, cool. That's all right. So that one seems pretty sensible. So how is the keynote talk progressing? I did see that there was a little bit of, I think it was annual leave that got in the way, but yes. So how's that coming along?
I just added a couple of bullets to that, so I didn't really find much time. I would also say that we should probably not discuss too much of that, because otherwise we take away surprises from the potential audience of that. So maybe we should align offline or in a separate call on details on that. The only thing that we could start to think about is who's actually going to give the talk, but I think we are not in a stage where either Eric or myself would feel like, yay, I'm doing it. But
well, I'm happy to do that as chair, if that's what we
Oh, yeah,
want
right.
to do.
You're right.
Since we have one now.
Fully welcome,
Um,
but I think then in this case we really have to support you getting that thing up running and flying.
Yeah, cool. And yeah, I can figure out with Chip how we're doing the recording on that side of things as a separate entity. I might actually have to upgrade my camera. Slightly not
Nah,
potato
it's
vision.
It's perfectly fine like that.
I'm going to have to clean that lot anyway, at least. Okay, cool.
I would probably have some time later this week to also keep fleshing out some info here and maybe making some diagrams to illustrate what the previous structure was like, what we envision the new structure being like, even just hierarchically.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm going to be on annual leave for a couple of days, but I'm not actually going anywhere due to pandemic, but I will be covered in paint, unfortunately, so I am still reachable.
All right, fair enough. We can coordinate async on Slack.
Cool.
And good luck with the painting.
Yeah, not of the artistic variety either. Okay, cool. So I think really the meat of it is point number 4, considering the CF working group definition that David added. So I'm going to pass it over to you at this point, David.
Sure, sounds good. I think one of the things we talked about yesterday or last time was that we would like to develop a complete picture of working groups, and that is going to take some period of time. And in order to accelerate that process and or do a beta test in some ways, we can take an urgent working group like CF deployment and related properties, and we can talk about what is related properties potentially in a second, and go and try to like fast track the definition and adoption process, because a little bit unknown right now. It's a little bit in limbo. There are folks working on it from different places that are a bit disorganized. So this seems like a great opportunity to play out the process we are hoping to run at a larger scale, at a smaller scale, and get an answer for who's collectively owning and leading that working group. I guess my proposal would be to keep the group small in terms of properties that it owns, rather than carve up everything that could possibly be related, take the things we know would be together in almost all circumstances, right? Like, I guess I'm going to make a proposal that then somebody might say is actually wrong, and those things might not end up together in some other world that I haven't predicted. But I would say that the Cloud Foundry acceptance tests and the CF deployment property almost definitely belong together. Other semi-related properties, which could be potentially combined, and like you could still say that cats belong somewhere else because it's about verification rather than distribution. So we can have that conversation in a second. But other things that might be in play would be like the CF on Kate's distribution, like other distributions, possibly something even like kubecf. So like you can start to make a very wide net. I think it's worth making the net wide for a second and thinking about what could go in there, and then ideally aligning on a proposal that is small of things that we're pretty sure belong together, regardless of the end state of how working groups are actually going to be defined. How do folks feel about that idea?
I mean, it seems pretty sensible to me.
Yeah, there's one consideration, but it's probably some long-term thing. What I have in my mind, I mean, until now we had CF deployment, which is widely used. We had this kubecf and CF for Kates, and it looked like completely separate products. They are not compatible, and there seems to be no path for migration, and that's the thing is missing, and that I think caused a lot of confusion in the community, and maybe even has the potential to break the neck of CF at the end of the day. Where somewhere you have flex in technology, otherwhere you have the new shiny stuff, but it just doesn't work. So that's for me a point to bring those things together so that the working group cannot escape to come up with a solution that leads us from where we are today into whatever the future is, and not think I don't care about the history on the one hand side, and the other part doesn't think about the future. So that would be for me the worst thing, because then I don't think that CF will have a future at all. But that violates slightly the idea of having it as small and as possible. And I can also imagine it's required to start small just to have something for CF deployment at all, so that it doesn't get stuck. That would also be a danger. But these are my thoughts. So I don't have a solution here. It's it's unfortunately the different.
It's that sort of slightly difficult thing where you've got, you know, cats sitting as, if you like, the one true, and the three different views of it with the three different distributions are all kind of referencing this one central source of truth, which really is that our contract with our end users, because it's representing the functionality of Cloud Foundry.
Yeah, and I think there's the additional complication that the CF acceptance tests, you know, although they've been our closest approximation to some sort of behavioral conformance suite, in practice they're not doing that. There's lots of incidental things that they're testing that aren't purely focused on the behavior that we might want to have as a more purely contractual representation of what we'd expect from a given CF installation, even from the mostly CLI-centric view of that. So, I mean, I could also see the argument for having that broken out separately as a separate domain of concern, even. Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of on the fence about, you know, I can see both sides of that for sure. Is, you know, should it go in with the things that it's very in practice coupled to in terms of that behavioral verification and integration testing behavior, or should we try to have it structured separately? I don't know.
Yeah, it's that difficult one, because I'm on the fence on this one. I think it depends on where the different distributions are going to go and what they actually look like in terms of their future paths as to the way that we should consider it.
Well, this is unfortunate because there's a lot of misalignment, because there's a lot of future worlds, right, where we could draw the lines differently, and we have to. My goal would be to get us aligned on a decision that we're pretty sure is the right decision for some number of properties. Sorry, Jan, we hadn't heard from you yet.
Nothing to add from my side, so just go on.
So if we don't know where the future is, then let's start with what we have. But I think this is a not so nice message in a keynote if you don't come up with at least some ideas where to go and in which direction working groups should be shaped.
Yes. Yeah, it's not ideal for that one.
A little bit short notice now. I mean, there are just 3 weeks left and nobody will know where the future is until then.
Yeah,
I wouldn't worry about having definitive answers for a talk at the event, because the event's the event, and this process is the process, and this just happen to be timed in a way that may not be the best, but that's okay. Just express it that way. I mean, just say, look, we don't know what the end structure is, and honestly, if we describe it as something that will be locked in, you know, and set permanently, then I think the whole nature of just organically letting the community evolve over time will be lost, right? So I would say, I personally think would guide you towards David's suggestion that we say, let's do kind of a best shot at saying, let's get CF deployment and things that might be best associated with it, with all their imperfections, just get that going and then see where it evolves to.
But Chip, if we don't agree what is aligned with CF deployment, because there's a lot of possible future worlds, the question becomes, we cannot make a working group that's just CF deployment, right?
Yes.
Like, that is off the table to me. Like, we want to run this process from start to finish, like maybe accelerated version of it for a real working group that is like, might actually be a standalone thing that isn't just a project. And I'm not even sure that folding cats into CF deployment makes it large enough to be a legitimate working group where like we can actually run this process. I guess I also want to take a brief hiatus from this conversation and think about what is the process we would use to decide what a working group is, right? Presumably one option would be we would make a proposal, get a little feedback on that proposal, see who's interested in being part of that working group, they solicit leads from that for that working group area, and then the TOC makes the decision, right? About like, okay, that is, we could also fast track all of that and just do all that decision, but presumably we'd like to have a brief period of community input on that definition of that working group, as well as like, you know, how are we going to decide who the leads are? Well, how are we going to know who's even interested in doing it? How are we going to know who are willing to, what vendors are willing to fund what area, you know, what levels, what areas? So I think we're going to need some time to figure out who the possible working group leads are for that group. So I think that can all be folded into like a week or two feedback solicitation process. So if you buy into that, we're looking for a proposal out of today for what a working group might look like that would actually be viable as a working group and might grow to include other things as time goes on. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, so if we just did CATS and CF deployment, I agree that it's small, and maybe to Stefan's concerns, are mostly like a maintenance focused area, right? And like a good working group includes lots of aspects of development so that it doesn't feel like a maintenance only working group. So what could we do here? We could combine it with those Kubernetes facing other things. What would we call that group? How do you decide, like, that represents like distribution and a release, something like that?
I think something like release integration wouldn't be the worst naming of that, or it could be, I think distribution would be wrong. That's what vendors do, right? Making a distribution out of it, taking these things. And I think we actually should, like, if you put CATS to something, then all the possible ways to install that thing that CATS tests should be in the same. So I think we actually have to add the Kubernetes facing projects, so kubectf, and that makes kubectf and CF for Gates adding to that, right?
Yeah, I mean those are the other distributions that, you know, are present in the community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because that way at least you've got your consistent testing going on, and each different distribution is targeting the same testing.
So, and there's overlaps even, right? I mean, kubectf also takes BOSH releases as input.
So my question would here, how do you determine the list of distributions that you think go there? Is it open for this working group? So if we have, let's say, 3 more in the future, because CF just runs that well in the community, would we add that, or do you think it should be less than 3, or how to find out? I mean, at the end of the day, of course, it's determined if somebody wants to step up and say, yes, I want to drive a certain distribution. I mean, that's the ultimate test, of course, but how to start, and we should position this working group at least to be open, I would say.
It's like, yeah, of course, it would be the working group to propose a different distribution mechanism if you come up with one. Like, if you think there's something else we should have as a distribution mechanism, this is the working group to go to and say, I have got an idea. I'd like to participate here. What do you think about my idea? And I could imagine that a working group that has these responsibilities will have a look at CF4Ks and kubectf and see how to make this one, because it's targeting the same. Maybe that's not, or it's a very long-term goal. I think even it was in the kubectf project description that they want to take whatever got transformed natively from there. So it was a goal of that thing.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense in terms of like looking at the cohesion of dependencies for those different distributions that we have in the community. I mean, kubectf is taking CF deployment as an input and putting it through quarks to transform things.
Mm.
My understanding is that at least at present, I don't think that there's the amount of bandwidth available to do any kind of incremental transformation of kubecf into something that's more Kubernetes native. So that's at least my understanding of the current priorities of the folks that have been contributing to that, which has been very slow over the past 6 months. So, you know, that kind of deliberate unification there, like I think it sounds good on paper, but I don't know when it would actually materialize. So I think that should be a concern there as well. And I think, you know, just knowing where the CF for Kate's discussion has been going over the past few months since the kind of vision statement that we and SAP and IBM had put forth around that architecture and those designs in the community. I mean, I think that's even looking at I think we're really on the verge of a more radical restructuring or rethinking of what CF for Kate's is right now. That probably really means a clean break there to focus on the new more modular architecture that's proposed in that vision document. So even for that, like that's now getting kubecf even farther away from what we think the ultimate successful architecture and distribution structure for a Kate-centered distribution of CF is going to be. So, you know, that's the other tension that I see pulling at a broader working group that's just focused around like a community reference distribution, which it kind of sounds like we've been talking about, like, you know, one working group to own all those things.
Eric, I wasn't following how you thought that proposed idea would fit into this working group. Do you think it would be good that that proposed idea ends up in this like community reference implementation working group, or not good?
I don't know. I think, I mean, I can see like from the perspective of this is the working group with this mandate, like they're the ones that would have all of the community reference distributions for what we think of as the CF app runtime. Like that's fairly clear as a mission. I would worry about the actual tensions of scope within that, because like if you look at that new proposed architecture for CF on Kate's and the rest of the distributions, like you know, CF deployment and kubecf effectively, there's really no technological overlap there at all. Yeah, maybe there's a few components that are shared still, but I mean, at this point, it's looking like very disparate technological concerns. And so I could see that being difficult for the working group to manage as scope.
Mm.
I would also just throw a structural point in that you might be able to use or not use. Remember that you can nest these things, right? So the idea could be that you say reference implementations are kind of grouped together. That would allow someone to take responsibility for even lifecycle managing. So let's say the CF for Kate's, effort just kind of stalls out, and okay, it is what it is. So all the energy, clearly should be focused on the VM-based and maybe the containerized, version of the VM-based architecture. I'm using that as just an example. So you could nest these things, right?
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I'm not sure if that's really posing a conflict. I mean, I can see that there are disparate things, but we are in that new structure not talking about a PM for that working group that will have to put a priority in a completely prioritized backlog and juggle things that are related to kubecf. There are going to be a couple of people working on kubecf that will be part of that working group, and if they have ideas, they might want to align them with, I mean, I can still see that there is overlap. They might want to align things with people that work on CF deployment, because they, in the end, deploy BOSH releases. They even have reasons to align with BOSH, although there's not that much development going on in BOSH. But new features in BOSH used in Bosch releases could be a huge problem for a kubectl based distribution, because there are things you can define, that there are even exist things in the Bosch world that you can't easily map over to Kubernetes. Like there are life cycle actions in Bosch defined that there's just like after deployment, there's nothing where you can do something after the full deployment has been done natively in Kubernetes. These are points where you can't interject without a lot of work, and other things like that could be there. So there's reasons to discuss, not always. Like maybe there will be things where they just show each other what they've done, and there's not much discussion and not much, but that doesn't mean such a working group doesn't work, I'd say.
Yeah,
Just
I
my
see
two
it more
cents.
from the let's say outcome point of view, or that whatever distribution or technology comes up, it addresses the needs of the users, and it especially provides a path that applications can be ported over, because from my point of view, that's the only reason for existence of CF. Otherwise, it's unrelated, and then you open up completely the discussion about what is the right tool to run an application on in the cloud. I mean, then it becomes completely blank, and so I'm in favor actually to bring the different distributions into one working group, and the crystallization point is maybe the cats, or the involvement of cats to ensure this compatibility. And the technology is different, and yeah, but that's okay, I would say.
It kind of depends on, imagine somebody is kind of in charge technically of that working group. There's two leader roles. It's not the execution lead, it's the other one, technical lead, whatever it's called. I should obviously review my working group member roles list, which I was just reviewing last week because I can't remember the names. But imagine that you're sort of responsible for thinking about the technical debt and the maybe like the ultimate reviewer of PRs and such, if no one else is reviewing it in a specific area. You're the fall through person on that working group for all the associated projects. It's pretty hard to be technically good at all of these different things, right? I think it's maybe Eric's point about like disparate technologies. Like I think from a roadmap perspective, it does make a lot of sense. And I think we could go ahead with this, and Tip's right, like we can nest these things, or like at least have people that only think about CF deployment and another person who only thinks about kubectl. But at the end of the day, there's going to be some sort of leadership structure that does have to think about it, both at a roadmap perspective and a technical perspective. The summary I'm hearing is it's hard to do that technically, and really valuable to do that on a roadmap, like to get alignment and start like removing things that don't make sense, so that people can know which strategy to go with in the community.
It's like, I don't think that there's going to be a fallback reviewer for all repositories that are owned by a working group. That's just, no matter how we form that doesn't make too much sense, right? If the last person that is technically able to review pull requests on a repository leaves the working group, let's shut down the repo. Like, I mean, there's a reason for those that leave, right? And so I think that's not a reason not to put these together. And it's true, if you come with new things, right? Just imagine we want to run CF on Infinidash or whatever other new technology comes up. That's still that all the other members of that working group might be completely unable to understand what that means, or what that technical commits on that are. So you need people working on those, and those are the approvers. And I think there's no fallback approver role for all repos. It's like,
I
Sure,
think that responsibility. Oh, go ahead, David.
No, I think I'm about to say the same thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way the working group roles are delineated right now, which of course we want to make sure is what we intend to have happen. But I think if you look at what's there right now, the working group tech lead has that ultimate responsibility. Now, certainly they could delegate that to people who are more authoritative on that repo within the working group or even elsewhere. But I think at least from a governance perspective, like there is that backstop of responsibility there for the tech lead within the working group, where if nobody else is there, Jan, maybe to your point, that's where they need to say like, well, nobody else has context on this, so we want to go through some sort of tech lifecycle thing to shut it down after a period of time if nobody else pops up with who's willing to take it on.
Okay, so I'm feeling like there's a proposal here that we take all maybe, and I think it does need some refining about name and scope, right? Like our goal would be to present in an email form to the CF Dev the first proposed working group with a proposed name and a paragraph that describes the scope of kind of what it would be in charge of, so that future things could be added or removed automatically based on that scope, right? And a proposed list of kind of projects that would fall into that currently too, right? Like if we executed the vision and scope and name against the current state, we would end up with this set of projects and repos owned by this working group, followed by a solicitation for interest in membership of that working group and roles and so on. Did I capture this correctly?
That sounds pretty good to me.
One thing I would like to suggest that you consider adding to that is it's not about the content, but it's more about the form factor of it. It'd be great if the definitions of the working groups were stored in the Cloud Foundry /community repository as they're created. And certainly, emailing to the community is also how you want to, ask them for next steps and all that good stuff. But I would begin to structure it in that repo, and all of you on the TOC should have,
so it's a pull request,
admin permission there.
It's like I've just put a link to the markdown file in there, and I'll add the link to the pull request where I tried a strawman of defining multiple of those. So, this PR is probably going to be superseded by something else that we come up as the first one. So.
Yeah, and I think if we say the first link that you posted out loud, then all the working groups will just materialize from some sort of astral plane by the Beetlejuice rule.
That sounds like a lot less work than figuring it out.
I know, that'd be great.
Good idea.
So we're looking for a PR that is a smaller version of the PR that Jan created earlier.
Yeah, just for
And
one.
then
more detailed. Like I think I've just had a list of, this is the couple of working groups and names and projects to put in, but no description, no describing paragraph for that working group.
So it's hard for us to do that in this conversation. Like we don't want to have 5 of us sitting here like writing a PR, but we do need to like write a PR. And some number of us need to write a PR kind of together, or maybe somebody needs to volunteer to write it, and then we'll circulate it for review among the TOC folks before we commit it as a PR. I think like on the VMware side, Erica, I would love to be involved in the drafting of that. I think we do care what goes where. We're really interested in how this shakes out. Maybe there's like an SAP VMware pairing to write it, where 2 of us do a little bit of out of band work over the next day or 2 and then send it off to the community.
Yep, I think I could participate here.
I'm just checking my schedule to see whether like I have more times in the morning.
Exactly.
Eric, do you have like a morning coming up, like Wednesday or Thursday, that you could do? I don't have Wednesday or Thursday. I'm like busy from 8 a.m. onward on both days, but I could probably do Friday. Yeah, I could do Friday.
Wednesday and Friday, I'd have some time there. Yeah.
If you say
Maybe we should
morning,
make it
it's
Eric.
this time or more or less.
Yeah, let me double check my calendar. One sec. Yeah, looks like I could do probably 8 a.m. Pacific onwards on Wednesday. That would work for me.
Wednesday would work for me as well.
Okay. And David, you said that doesn't work for you.
It doesn't. I could do it Friday, but I don't want to wait. Like, let's get it drafted. And could you two put it in like a Google Doc so we can all comment on it, and then we'll convert it to like a PR over the next, once we're all happy with it.
Google Docs.
Could I give you my smell test on that and say,
Do it.
Whoever's going to take the first crack, put it in a PR, and then do all of your collaboration in the PR.
That's also, yeah, that's
Fine.
easier for me because I don't
Great.
know whether I have the usable Google Doc account. I mean, I have one, but it's only a private one. I don't know if I'm allowed. That's something I need to sort out. It's
Great,
another
thank
problem.
you. I'm really excited to see our tooling change to like a more open, friendly way, for example.
Yeah,
I just don't know how to do it.
It's hard, but that's okay. It's I'm going to be here to kind of keep nudging you to be more transparent using standardized stuff. Even though Google Docs is certainly standard, it's we're looking for a permanent record here, more discoverable.
Exactly.
Okay, Eric,
Great,
do you
Stefan, should I send you? I can send you a calendar invite after we wrap up here.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So I think we've got a plan. And we've also got to the end of the agenda as we had it. So has anyone got any other business?
One thing I think we had talked about a little bit last time was also taking a closer look at the proposed roles for the working groups. Maybe we could spend some time doing that as well. I know David and I had looked at those a little bit over the past week, and we had a few thoughts for at least tweaks for names and or responsibilities.
Okay.
Let me pull up the link to that.
Oh, I've got that here.
As you pull that up, I have I think a shorter, quick hit item I wanted to suggest to y'all. One of the things that I think would be pretty important is just establishing early that the vulnerability management process is important. And so I would strongly urge figuring out how the people working on that effort on behalf of the community can kind of maybe report historically to you all on a regular basis, because making sure that they're actively managing inbound vulnerability reports and et cetera, and that they have enough support and enough community engagement, I think is a very important thing. So I'll just throw that out there, and we could easily, I think, ask them to maybe send someone to these calls, or however you wanted to do that.
The one problem with that would be that they will probably have content for a non-public meeting, and this meeting is public, so and recorded. So.
True, but talking about history, and
maybe that's fine.
What's already been announced, right? And then they don't need to let you know about every inbound report.
Yeah, that's true.
But maybe more process type stuff.
Yeah.
All right, I will ask Paul if he or someone else would be willing to do that. Thanks for the derailing.
Thank you. So Eric and David, you were mentioning about roles and some renaming and some tweaks and changes.
I already forgot, Eric. what we were thinking about. Can you remind us?
Yeah, I think we were looking at like the distinction between that working group technical lead versus the approver role. And like the language, which I think is still largely drawn from the Knative documents that we started with, the scope of responsibility for the approvers is really focused on kind of the PR lifecycle, like looking at incoming PRs individually and providing feedback on those, deciding whether those should be approved to merge into the code base. And so we were wondering, like, well, how does that compare with a lot of the other work that we know goes on in the community around issue triage? And it looks like that wasn't really one of the explicit responsibilities for the approver role. And it was really just following on the working group technical lead. I think the technical lead and maybe even the execution lead, now that I'm looking over the details here, to do that larger triage of issues that's coming in. And so we were wondering if it would make sense to treat that as part of also the formal responsibilities of that non-lead role. And maybe it would, in that case, make sense to call that role something like a maintainer, as opposed to just an approver. And I think that's about as far as we've gotten in terms of structured or cohesive thinking about how we'd want to tweak these roles to be appropriate for the community.
To put it another way, Cloud Foundry is mature enough in its life cycle compared to some other maybe Kubernetes projects that are younger, that like the biggest area of responsibility isn't approving large numbers of incoming PRs with tons of new stuff. It's really taking ownership of the overtime maintenance, the issue triaging, keeping dependencies up to date, things like that. I think we cannot have all of that fall through to a really small set of leads. That's not where this project is in its life cycle. People are relying on it, and we need lots of people in the maintenance of role.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a new role that isn't approver, called maintainer, that's stronger than approver. But maybe if you want to be an approver, you also have to be a maintainer, right?
I think that makes sense. And I wonder, is there scope for another role in here that isn't, it's kind of pre-member almost. So is getting involved, but isn't heavily involved yet. And how do we grow the community that way to get new blood in, as it were?
I don't think you have to be to clarify, Lee, maybe you just don't have to be you don't have to have a role in a working group to make a contribution, right? The working group are people that have some commitment to contribute in the area, even if it's like a really weak commitment, like a member, as opposed to, or a stronger commitment.
So I just try to map those roles to the world I know, that is cloud controller and, let's say, my team. I mean, I'm personally not filing so much PRs, but I would consider then my team as a member of the cloud controller working group. We have filed tons of PRs and issues, etc. So that's right. We are definitely not approvers. We don't have commit rights in the repository, and maybe that's a path that we could go. So when I read first time these roles, yes, I saw approver, but if I look at usually repos, I find more the term committer. That's something that is more or easier to understand for me. So that's why I was a bit, is a approver a different committer? How does it work? In reality, I see that everybody from the copy team can actually approve and merge PRs. At least that's what we experience, and that works good.
I guess that comes from like the whole list comes from, like, I think it's basically Knative, and that comes from the Kubernetes community, where one of the primary things they work in is PRs that need approval. Like, there's nobody committing to the main branch, nobody. Like, there are exceptions, and I think it's the working group leads that might get their privileges escalated to be able to do even a force push or something. But that's how the term is coined, I think. Which doesn't mean we can't just change it, because it's a gap that's hard to understand. And in the Cloud Foundry community, people were committers. And if we just say, we just don't commit to the main branch, but instead use PRs, but you're still a committer, that's fine for me.
Yeah,
as
okay.
well. I think
With
we shouldn't
committer,
be
I
too
also
attached.
meant the one
Just
that
as a
presses the
historical,
button,
like, where
merge
this
the PR.
is coming from.
Okay.
And one word to the triaging of issues. We might get into a problem if we don't have somebody, like a single person, more or less, that is responsible for issues being triaged, which doesn't mean he has to do all the work. But the responsibility for this project is in good health. If I open an issue, it takes just, I don't know what, 24 hours, 48 hours, unless some label is on that, which tells me somebody has looked at it and at least got a first rule of thumb thing of this is a big issue, or this needs discussion, or whatever. Then there should be a responsible, and who, if not the lead, should have this responsibility.
Oh yeah,
I would
I think
say-
it definitely makes sense for that to ultimately fall with the leads, but I'd be concerned that if each working group is just implicitly delegating responsibility for that activity to the approvers or maintainers or committers or whatever we call that more intermediate tier of participation in the working group, then like it won't be as clear from the outside. Like if it's going to happen that way anyway, we may as well make it explicit. Yeah, but agreed that the ultimate responsibility for that should lie with the working group leads. So if nobody else in the group is doing it and there are some timeliness expectations that we want to set, then it'd be their responsibility.
I want to get back to what Stefan was saying for a second about what his team currently would do and roles that we would play. I was running the same exercise for like a really central code base like Cloud Controller. And I think we have several approvers and maintainers, right, at VMware. And then we have some members as well. And I think a successful structure would incentivize like other vendors like SAP to also at least have one approver/maintainer. Let's call them maintainers, because like there is a maintenance work to be done in that area too, as well as just approving new changes. So ideally, all vendors that were really interested in what was going on in Cloud Controller and wanting to make changes would want to have one maintainer at least. So I think that's the advantage. And I want to get us away from the conversation about teams, like the CAPI team, right? The CAPI team implies a fully staffed team of people that only focuses on CAPI that are essentially leads. Yep. Right, or like a team of 4 to 6 leads in this model, and that's not what we're doing. Right, we're trying to create a world where people who are not full-time focused on one aspect of a code base, just in supporting the open source, can have a place in the community. Right, including at VMware, we have people, more and more people that fall into that category, and we'd love to give them like official roles and labels so people can understand how they're interacting with the CAPI code base.
So for the CAPI code base, I could imagine that we over time, I would even wish that we over time have 1 or 2 colleagues in this approver, committer, whatever role. On the other hand, I'm also very happy that we have experienced people in the team who can have a look at our PRs and give very valuable feedback, because in the beginning, that's not so easy. It's a big, huge code base. And if I think of the space supporter role, for instance, when we started, without a jump start by Mona, it wouldn't have worked. Now I think we can go and can contribute quite regularly.
So is there a proposal to rename approver that we want to go ahead with? Like, I love copying the Knative roles because they're easy for the global community to understand. If we align with them, then it's like, this is just what the roles are over in Knative. So there's a real advantage to aligning, but I also don't know how to reconcile. Like, is there a small change we can make, like renaming approver to make it more indicative of the fact that your responsibility includes some maintenance as well? Or do we just want to keep the roles copied because it's so easy to copy the roles?
Why not just change the description to be clear that you expect some maintenance work? So then the taxonomy stays globally familiar, but the responsibility is clarified.
I'm fine
Are
with that.
these role names consistent across a lot of communities? I mean, like we know they're consistent with Knative because that was the origination, but is that same language used in Kubernetes or other places like SDO, or if there are other governance structures that we want to look at? I mean, if they are, then maybe there's some benefit to that consistency of role terminology, but if there's fragmentation there, then I don't think we should over-index on it. People will
I
learn
believe
new
it's consistent.
terminologies for their environments pretty easily.
You're in software, you got to learn new words all
Yeah.
the time. It is consistent in a big chunk of let's say kube ecosystem related projects. It kind of started with the wording being used in Kubernetes and then expanded out. So you'll see it in SDO, you'll see it in Knative, you see it in a number of other projects that are often CNCF and just housed even in
All right, so that's the answer, Eric. It sounds like we are in favor then of adding some responsibilities and requirements to approver. And those, I guess, since I haven't signed up for anything, if you folks wouldn't mind, I will take a stab at making a PR to the roles in collaboration with anybody who wants to on Slack. But you can also just comment on my PR, right? We can like reconcile it and maybe meet next time and approve it together.
I'd actually say we can approve and merge it offline if there's no need to discuss it. So we should get used to not requiring synchronous communication if there is no conflict.
Great. So we could do like a Slack-based vote in our public TOC channel on it when we feel like it's ready.
If you
Why
do a
not?
PR, we can do a GitHub-based vote, basically.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, reviewers. Oh, see, I'm learning all
Yep.
this stuff.
So
by the way,
we're-
Chip, are the colleagues now added to the VG governance whatever team that we had in the org?
Nope.
Or should there be a TOC team in the org?
There's a new TOC team in the org, which has the admin rights on that repo, and the old working group one that we used for bootstrapping has been removed.
Great.
Cool. Yeah, so David, if you want to have a go at that one, I'm more than happy to review that.
Great.
Okay.
I feel like we're about out of time for today's meeting, but I'm sure we'll come up with more. Lee, what's the proposal for what we're doing next week again? Can you remind everybody how next week's going to be different?
So for next week, the idea is that we are joined by a group of individuals that are currently project leads and project technical leads to talk to us about moving from projects to working groups. So it's a bit of a special.
Sounds fabulous.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. So actions, I think we've got all sorted. So there's 2 PRs to be put together, and need to write some words to send to people to encourage them to come along next week. Awesome. All right. Thank you very much, all,
Super.
and see
Thanks,
you next
everyone.
week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
See you.